I never thought a single choice could almost end my life. It wasn't a ghost, or a stranger lurking in the shadows. It was something far closer, something I didn't even see coming. That night, reality itself seemed to twist around me, and I realized I was barely alive. Call to action. Call to action. Before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, leave a like, and drop a comment. Trust me, you'll want to stick around until the very end, because the last twist will shock you in ways you can imagine. It all began with what seemed like a normal weekend. I was supposed to meet some friends for a short camping trip in the mountains, a spontaneous getaway to escape the city noise. We packed our gear, the usual tents, backpacks, and a few flashlights, thinking nothing could go wrong. The air was crisp, the scent of pine sharp in my nose, and the sky stretched out like a velvet sheet sprinkled with stars. It felt perfect until it wasn't. We drove for hours, winding through narrow roads carved into the cliffs. By the time we reached the clearing where we planned to set up camp, the sun was disappearing behind the horizon, and a cold wind began to snake through the trees. Something about the shadows seemed heavier here, as if they weren't just the absence of light, they were alive, shifting. I shrugged it off as nerves. Mountains can be intimidating at dusk. The first night started uneventfully. We shared stories around a campfire, the flames crackling and throwing long, jittery shadows against the surrounding pines. I laughed with my friends, but every now and then, I felt the sensation of being watched. A branch would snap behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there. My heart would skip a beat, and I'd force myself to laugh it off, telling myself it was just an animal. That's when I first saw him, or rather, at first, I thought it was a silhouette of another camper lost in the darkness, but then I realized no one else was supposed to be here. The figure didn't move like a human. It stood perfectly still, just beyond the firelight, almost blending into the darkness of the forest. My breath caught, and I nudged my friend. "Do you see that?" I whispered. He squinted but shook his head. "Probably just a tree," he said. But I knew the shape was wrong. It was too symmetrical, too deliberate. We tried to ignore it, hoping that morning would bring clarity. But morning never came for the first story I would live to tell. As the night grew colder, I crawled into my sleeping bag, trying to convince myself that shadows don't follow, that shapes in the dark aren't conscious. But sleep never truly arrived. Every rustle, every whisper of wind against the tent sounded like soft footsteps outside, pacing back and forth. My heart thumped in my chest, loud enough to feel like it would give me away. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt distorted. Then came the smell. It was faint at first, metallic, like copper, and it grew stronger with each breath. Something wasn't right. I peeked through the tent flap and saw the shape again. Closer this time, I could make out a tall figure, impossibly thin, standing just at the edge of the light thrown by our fire. I froze, unable to look away. Its head tilted slightly, almost curiously, as if it were examining me. A chill ran down my spine, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. I whispered for my friends to wake up, but their soft snores met my ear. I shook one gently. Still, nothing. Panic began to rise like smoke in my lungs. I had to act, but the figure, it was still there. Watching. Waiting. And that was when the first scream broke through the night. Not mine, not anyone's human scream, but a deep, hollow, animalistic shriek that made the hair on my arms stand on end. We bolted from the tent, flashlights in hand, hearts pounding. We ran through the dark forest, tripping over roots and rocks. Every direction looked the same, and every shadow seemed to stretch toward us. The wind picked up, carrying with it whispers, soft voices repeating a sound I couldn't comprehend, a sound that made the skin crawl on my neck. My flashlight caught glimpses of the figure again, darting between trees, impossibly fast, always just out of reach. I remember thinking, if we stop, it's over. But we were running blind, branches slapping our faces, dirt in our mouths, fear driving us forward. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, and yet I couldn't stop. The forest seemed endless, and the darkness had a weight to it. pressing on my chest like a heavy blanket of dread. Something inside me knew this wasn't an ordinary animal. This wasn't even human. Hours or what felt like hours later, we stumbled upon a narrow trail that led down the mountain. We didn't speak. We didn't even look back. All that mattered was to escape. By the time we reached the road, the first rays of sunlight were piercing the horizon. The forest behind us looked peaceful in the morning light, almost welcoming, as if nothing had happened. But we all knew better. I don't think I'll ever forget that night. The figure, the shriek, the whispers, everything about it was burned into my memory, and I still don't know exactly what it was. Was it a person? Some lost wanderer, or something else entirely? Something that has no name and no reason. All I know is that I came terrifyingly close to not making it, and the forest kept its secrets well. That was just the beginning, the first of 3 stories of near-death encounters that changed my life forever. By the end, you will realize how fragile life really is, and how close we can come to crossing a line in everything that exists. By the time we reached the edge of the forest, I thought the worst was behind us. The first rays of sunlight were cutting through the trees, illuminating a world that suddenly seemed normal, almost mundane. Birds were singing. A distant brook gurgled gently. But inside me a pulse of unease refused to fade. Something about the night didn't belong to daylight, and I knew we had only survived by sheer luck. We decided to find a local ranger station, hoping to report what had happened or at least get some reassurance. The forest had a strange reputation in town, whispered about in local bars and gas stations. Tales of hikers disappearing without a trace, strange lights appearing at night, and odd figures glimpsed through the trees. I had dismissed it as superstition. Until now, the ranger's office was quiet, almost too quiet. The old man behind the counter looked up with tired eyes as we stumbled in, our faces pale and our clothes caked in dirt. I tried to speak, but my voice faltered. We think someone or something was out there last night, I stammered. He didn't flinch. Instead, Elian advised, sighing deeply. You're lucky, he said slowly. Most don't come back from that area. Some things in those woods, they don't like to be seen. And if they are seen, well, they don't let go. His words sank like stones. I felt the blood drain from my face. What do you mean? What things? I asked, though a part of me didn't want to know. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Stories aren't enough. People who've survived can only describe shapes, sounds, feelings, fear that isn't natural. They vanish, they appear, and they can follow you home. If you, Sawit, were lucky to escape. Most of my colleagues, his voice trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. I left the ranger station with more questions than answers. My friends and I agreed to take a safer path down the mountain, sticking to marked trails this time. But as we walked, the air seemed thicker, heavier, almost charged with an energy that made the hair on my arms stand on end. Every shadow cast by the early morning sun seemed to twitch unnaturally, like it had a life of its own. Then it happened. Whisper. Soft, deliberate, impossibly close, though no one was near. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Did you hear that? I whispered, scanning the trees. My friends stopped too, their eyes wide. The whisper came again, a susurration of syllables I couldn't understand. Yet somehow it carried a warning, and then a blur of something dark, rushing between the trees. So fast it was almost invisible. My pulse spiked. I yelled at my friends to run, and we bolted again. But the trails seemed to twist unnaturally, loops forming where there should have been straight paths. Panic clawed at my throat. How could a trail be changing while we were moving? Branches lashed at our faces. A low hum began to fill the air, vibrating in my chest, like the forest itself was alive and watching us. I stumbled, my flashlight flickering. I saw it again, just for a moment, a tall, thin shadow that bent in ways a human shouldn't. Its head tilted toward me, eyes something that resembled eyes glinting in the weak light. One of my friends screamed. I grabbed their arm, dragging them forward. Every step felt like wading through water. Resistance everywhere. And still, that soft, eerie whisper followed us, circling, never revealing its source. Fear became tangible, almost physical, pressing against my lungs, making every breath a labor. Suddenly, we reached a clearing. My flashlight caught something lying on the ground, a backpack. Familiar, one of our own. But the way it was positioned, with a tree branch draped over it, looked deliberate. A warning. My stomach churned. Whoever or whatever had been following us was no longer hiding. The forest had decided we weren't leaving alive. I grabbed the pack, shoving it toward my friend. "Keep moving!" I yelled. We ran blindly, stumbling, tripping, clawing at the ground to pull ourselves forward. That hum in the forest grew louder, almost a roar now, reverberating through my bones. I could feel it trying to chase us, push us into the shadows. I didn't think we were going to make it. My legs borned lungs screaming, yet something inside refused to surrender. And then, silence. We stopped, panting, ears straining. The forest seemed to be holding its breath. No whisper, no rustle, nothing. The shadows in the trees hung perfectly still. I dared a glance behind. Osund saw nothing. Nothing but sunlight spilling into the clearing. But I knew better. The figure had retreated for now, but it wasn't gone. It had been testing us, measuring our fear, our desperation. I could feel its presence lingering, like a cold weight pressing against the back of my neck. Even as the forest opened into familiar territory, I wanted to tell my friends, to warn them, but my voice caught in my throat. Words failed me. We eventually stumbled onto a small road, barely paved, leading down the mountain. A car approached in the distance. Relief hit me like a wave, and we waved our arms frantically, desperate for human contact, for confirmation that we were still tethered to reality. The vehicle slowed, and the driver leaned out, eyes narrowing in confusion at our dirty, frantic state. We explained. Nothing couldn't explain anything. We didn't want to. The forest, the figure, the whispers. There are some things that shouldn't be spoken aloud. We just wanted to get home, to escape the lingering sense of dread that clung to our skin like a second layer. Even now, days later, I can't shake the memories. The way it watched, the sounds that weren't there, the unnatural, suffocating cold that gripped me. I lie awake at night, hearing whispers that don't exist in the silence of my apartment. I see shadows where none should be, and I remember how easily life can hang by a thread, how quickly the familiar can twist into something unrecognizable. That night I didn't just survive the forest, I survived something beyond comprehension, something that wasn't bound by the rules of the natural world. And as much as I try to rationalize it, part of me knows I barely escaped. The story isn't over, not yet. Because while we fled that forest, I realized that near-death encounters aren't always the work of chance. Sometimes they're a warning, sometimes they're a test, and sometimes they're only the beginning. Even after we left the forest behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that it had followed us. My friends tried to laugh it off, making jokes about the mountain ghosts. But I knew the truth. We had encountered something far beyond explanation. Days later, I began noticing strange occurrences. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision, even in my apartment. Doors would creak open on their own. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Stress, exhaustion, or maybe my imagination. But then came the dreams, visions so vivid they felt real. I would wake in a cold sweat, convinced that someone or something was in the room with me. Each dream began the same way. The forest, dark and silent, the whispers, and that same tall, thin figure, always just beyond reach, always watching. One night, I woke to a noise downstairs. My apartment was on the second floor, and the sound was subtle, at first a soft tapping, like fingertips brushing against glass. My heart hammered in my chest. I froze, straining to listen. The tapping grew louder, deliberate, slowly, I crept toward the staircase. The air was colder than it should have been, and the hairs on my arms stood on end. I reached the top of the stairs and peered down. Nothing. Just the dim glow of the streetlights outside casting long shadows through the window. I told myself it was nothing. Probably a branch scraping against the glass, but then I heard it a whisper, soft and deliberate. Unmistakable. I'm still here. Panic surged through me. I bolted from the apartment, leaving the door open behind me, running into the streets, gasping for breath. The city seemed normal, alive, ordinary, but I couldn't escape the sensation that I was being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever I had encountered in the mountains had followed me. And now it was patient, lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. Weeks passed, but the incidents didn't stop. My friends reported similar experiences, shadows shifting in the corner of their eyes, whispers they couldn't place, that same oppressive cold that seemed to move with them. It became clear that we had triggered something, some presence that didn't follow the rules of the natural world. One night, unable to sleep, I decided to investigate, to face the fear that had been gnawing at me relentlessly. I returned to the forest, not the same route, but a path I remembered from that night, hoping to understand what we had encountered. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, the forest floor littered with broken branches and the scent of damp earth. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness. Every step forward sent chills down my spine, every snap of a twig echoing like a gunshot. Then I saw it just ahead, where the light from my flashlight hit the trees. De figure, taller than any human, impossibly thin, head tilting as if observing me with a curiosity I couldn't comprehend. It didn't move toward me, didn't need to. Its presence alone was suffocating, a weight pressing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I wanted to run, but my feet were frozen. I could feel my pulse in my temples, my breath shallow, the cold sinking into my bones. The whispers returned, surrounding me, unintelligible but threatening, a chorus of voices speaking just beyond understanding. The forest seemed to close in, the shadows twisting into shapes that were not shadows at all, shapes that reached toward me, yearning for something I couldn't name. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished. The forest was silent, the whispers gone, the air warm again. I collapsed to the ground, shaking uncontrollably, my mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. I had faced it, whatever it was, and lived, but the memory of its presence lingered, a reminder that some encounters don't end with escape. When I returned home, I tried to move on, tried to rationalize, tried to forget, but the shadows never left. Even in bright sunlight, I would catch movement in the corner of my eye. Even in crowded places, I felt watched. That night in the forest had changed me. Had marked me. I was no longer the same person who laughed around the campfire. I had touched something beyond understanding, and it touched me back. I don't know why I survived. Maybe it allowed me to leave. Maybe it was curious. Maybe it simply enjoyed the fear it instilled. But I do know this. Life is fragile, and death can come in forms you cannot predict or fight. Near-death experiences aren't always near accidents. Sometimes, they are encounters with forces that defy reality, that test your mind, your courage, your very soul. And as I sit here now, recounting this story to you, I feel the same unease that has never left me. I feel the presence at the edges of my perception, the subtle weight of being watched. Because some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. Some things, once escaped, follow you forever. So, if you ever find yourself hiking in a forest, lost in the dark, remember 'tis there are eyes that do not blink, shapes that do not breathe, and whispers that do not belong to any living being. And sometimes, they are closer than you think. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more terrifying, true near-death experiences, make sure to leave a like, hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and comment below with your thoughts or experiences. Your support helps bring these stories to life. And trust me, you don't want to miss the next one.